לדברים שאנחנו תואמים וכל מה שקשור לסינגל קאסק ניישן. נופל לנו בצ'אט, איב עשה לנו ג'ס תקפית, and we can basically start as far as I'm concerned.
Just one message, I'll say it in Hebrew, then we can move to English and start the presentation, if that's okay with you, Jess.
Yeah, sure.
הודעה רק למי שלא ראה, מי שנרשם לטעימה השנייה של פלורה ופאונה ביום שני הבא, שלחנו אימייל, יש לנו בעיות לוגיסטיות לגבי שחרור של החבילה מהמכס, היא תקועה שם ויש בלגן, לכן אנחנו צריכים לדחות את הטעימה לאחרי פסח, כי אנחנו לא רוצים לעשות אותה בפסח. התאריך החדש של הטעימה יהיה ב-6 לאפריל, יום שלישי. שלחנו גם אימייל לכל אחד שנרשם, אם אחד מכם נרשם אז הוא יכול לראות את כל הפרטים, במידה ויש בעיה, עניינים, אז דברו איתנו. סליחה מראש, אבל נפלאות דרכי המכס. Okay, that's it, Jess. The mic is yours. I'm recording this for the people that might not be able to join. Go ahead.
Sure. Hello, good evening. And good later evening for you guys who are much further ahead than me. My name is Jess and I am the Global Sales Manager for Single Cask Nation, and I am the person who runs the world. My two bosses run America, and then I get everything else. So I think I have a better job personally. Tonight we have 5 whiskies. It's a mixture from our first release and second release. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about whiskies, but then I think we've probably all done enough Zoom tastings that I'm going to make you guys tell me a bit about the whiskies as well. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt me or put them in the chat box down at the bottom, and I'll try and keep up with those. I suppose I should start by checking that everybody has whiskies in front of them and that we're all good to go. Okay, that sounds good. Thumbs up, and I can see whiskies, which always pleases me. So I guess we will start with maybe I'll tell you a little brief bit about us, and then we'll get onto the whiskey because nobody likes to wait too long for getting whiskies.
Sorry, we start with number 1.
Yeah, so
how do we start? We start with number 1 and go up. What's the order?
Yes, we do.
Yes, usually we start with 1.
It's always good to check though. Yeah, we have a 1 to 5 in front of you. If you guys, Gal sent me the tasting map that he's made, so you've got an order, but I am thinking I might mess about with that a bit. I've been having a bit of a reflection on it this afternoon.
Okay.
So I actually think numerically, traditionally, tastings start with dram number 1, but actually maybe we should start with dram number 4.
Okay.
And I have a logic attached to this, I promise, and I'm not trying to mess with your heads too much. The reason I'm going to suggest we start with number 4 is because it is the lightest of what we have here tonight. And number 1 is a bit of a big beast. And at first I thought we could maybe start with something big and heavy, but then I was starting to think about number 4 this afternoon. So maybe that's where I'll start. So I will maybe tell you a little bit about us and this whiskey. Please feel free to have a little nose of all of them if you want. I would recommend we try them in the order that we're going to go with. But comparative nosing is always really interesting. So dram number 4, for those of you who maybe don't have the mat, is our Aberfeldy 28-year-old. And I already know there's one fan in this tasting of this dram, which makes me feel quite good. So my nearly neighbour, he's not even that far away from where I'm sat currently. So we've got the Aberfeldy. I should introduce to you what it is that we do, and then I'll tell you about the whiskey as well. Yeah, thanks. I have the bottles here that I'll hold up as well if that helps. So Single Cask Nation, we are just about to celebrate our 10th anniversary this year, which I'm not entirely sure what that celebration is going to look like currently, but we were founded by my 2 bosses who were best friends, and they came from the olden days of whiskey blogging when that was a thing that people used to do a lot more, and they talked whiskey and got on really well. And the short romantic version of the story is that they decided to, well, maybe they could try bottling these whiskies themselves. And their words seemed pretty straightforward. It turns out that's not the truth at all, but we'll keep to it as that kind of romantic story of they were two friends who loved sharing whiskies, and the idea that as they were based in the US, there's not a huge tradition over there of independent bottlers of whiskies, which is more prominent here in Scotland, but not so much in America. So we were formed as a members club. There was a sign-up fee to join the gang, and there was bottlings put out for the nation members. And that was just really how we kind of ticked over until 2017, when we launched a physical presence in US stores. So there's an online and a retail version in the US. And then in 2019, the decision was made to expand. And I was taken on as the very clunkily titled UK, Europe, rest of the world, which we just decided to make global because it sounds fancier. And I think that sounds pretty good to me. So we have just finished off our second release and we're working on our third release. And the Aberfeldy that you have in your hands at the moment is from our second release, which was put out just before Christmas, but it's taken a little bit of time to get to you guys. So it's just hitting Israel. Okay, well, that's enough little chat about me. What about the whiskey? We can come back to single cask nation. What we look for predominantly is we like to pick interesting whiskies. We are first and foremost whiskey geeks. And so we are always looking for interesting and unusual things to bottle. But I'm sure you will also have heard plenty of other ambassadors tell you the same story. So what is it that makes our casks different? Well, I like to think we have a focus on texture. We're real mouthfeel guys in the way that we pick casks and the way they taste. And even just nosing this Aberfeldy makes my mouth water. This is my first drink of the day, so I'm very excited to share it with you. It's nice and peary. I'm going to get into a bit more of the tasting notes and what it looks like. I'm going to have a little sip first because that was, enough talking. I was watching something on Aberfeldy today about the history of the burn. The water source that runs behind the distillery used to have so much gold in it that you could just put your hands through it and like scoop it out the river. It's not quite like that anymore, but the distillery at Aberfeldy, they take their water from the source. So they like to tell you that there's a bit of gold in every dram that you're drinking. So it's got a lovely kind of honeyed thing, if you ask me, if that translates as gold. What can I tell you about Aberfeldy? If you haven't been to Scotland, Aberfeldy is in the Highlands. It's just outside Perth. It's a sort of kind of mid-size distillery. It's about 3.5 million litres a year that they produce. And it was set up by the brothers, Tommy and John Dewar, who everybody would probably know maybe more for the Dewar's blended whiskey. They have a common history that's similar with lots of big name distilleries or big name brands in Scotland, that they were originally greengrocers. So Gordon and MacPhail were greengrocers originally. Johnny Walker was originally just a little greengrocer shop in Kilmarnock, and they were selling whiskies pretty early on. And when things get into demand, obviously you want to source things yourself. And so it was maybe thought that perhaps what they should do is set up a distillery. And the distillery was built not far from where their father came from originally. But the thing that I find really interesting about Dewar's and Aberfeldy is that they were absolute wizards of marketing. They were one of the first brands to really push into America and to really emphasize on blending. They trademarked this idea of marrying whiskies together before they're blended, so putting them in casks and then moving them on to something. And I really actually, it's one of these distilleries I always forget how delicious it is. It's a really lovely light and floral style whiskey, I think here, definitely lots of honey, and it's really gentle. And the reason I'm messing with Gal's beautifully arranged lineup for this is because I'm just a bit worried that there's a few punchy, shovey drams that would have been before this, and I don't want you to lose the kind of subtlety of how elegant I think this whiskey is. It is a 28-year-old. It's a single cask. It's come from refill bourbon. And it is 42.7%. This is the bottle. Couple of features of our bottles, of course. We have a coloured cask. So this kind of my light's not doing it very good justice, but this kind of maroony purpley color, that tells us that we are in the Highlands. So maybe another feature of our bottles, if you buy them, which is obviously my plug for merchandising and sales, we have a little graph here on the side, which we call our flavometer, which has, it's a great little kind of infographic that tells you the kind of flavor profile of what we're looking for those of you who maybe don't want to get into other people's tasting notes. But it gives you a kind of like profile of what we think the whiskey. So obviously Aberfeldy traditionally isn't peated, so there's no smoke in here, but we're quite high rating for the floral and sweet. I just really love this. I could drink it with a straw. Obviously I'm supposed to promote responsible drinking, so maybe don't sit with a straw out the top of this bottle, maybe sit with a very large glass of it instead. But I think it's just got a really lovely kind of summery attitude to it. Today here in Glasgow actually is the first day in a while that it's been sunny. I sat on my doorstep and ate a sandwich earlier, which was
I was wearing a shorts and a t-shirt.
Were you tap saff? No.
No, I'm not playing
that
that game, but I was wearing a shorts and a t-shirt.
It was amazing. And this I think is perfect. See, if I had a nice little garden, you can't see from the angle that we're at in my living room here. There's a carefully crafted pile of mess, which I call my desk behind me. But I'm on the first floor. I don't have a garden. So yeah, sitting on the doorstep is the best thing I get for being outside. But it was lovely. I went to my favorite Mrs. Falafel, got a falafel wrap, came home. So it was perfect. And so I think this is a really nice, gentle opener. We'll go backwards to the big and beefy numbers, I think. But I just wanted something to kind of soothe everybody into an evening of whiskey. So cheers, slange, which I always miss. Like, there's no way to kind of clink there's no clinking on Zoom. It's very disappointing. I think this is really lovely. I don't want to over egg this. So how about you guys tell me? You can either come on and tell me, or you could do like a thumbs up if you like this. If you don't, I'd just like to say, there's also no answer. You don't have to like everything in this tasting. Just, just so you're not worried. There's no pressure.
This one they have to like because it's excellent.
It's not peated at all?
No.
Because it says like smoky character.
The wood, the old wood is given.
Only from the bell? It's not in the smell, only in the taste.
Actually, I'm quite a fan of the old wood, the varnish notes, and this one's really up my alley. It's really nice.
Yeah, 28 years in a cask for something that's quite delicate. You're definitely going to start to feel more of that wood influence. So maybe that's why you're getting a kind of like a smoky effect, because it's been in a cask for a good sizable chunk of time. And after a while, obviously, your barrel starts to really influence the spirit. And I think that definitely happens if you have a lighter spirit. That happens quicker, I think. But it's got a really nice creaminess. I was saying earlier that we're all about mouthfeel. To me, I think this is like a really good example of it. It's not too heavy, but it sort of sits in your tongue until you've swallowed. It doesn't just disappear through your palate, which I always find a little bit disappointing in whiskies that make me drink it quicker than I already do. Yeah, it's come down quite low naturally. 42.7 is our natural bottling strength. We haven't fixed it at that. So the cask has had a good old chunk of the angel share taken out of it during the time that it's been sat waiting for us to bottle. But I think it's just a really gentle, pleasant dram. And there aren't too many independent bottlings of Aberfeldy around. I think Aberfeldy in itself is not heavily marketed in the UK, really. The 12 does a little bit. If you go to the distillery, there's a great opportunity for you to get cask strength, which is quite unusual, because the parent company, Bacardi, don't really tend to bottle like we're doing here at cask strength. So it gives you a little insight into what an unfettered Aberfeldy could look like. But I think this is quite delicious. I'm quite pleased with this. I know I'm supposed to be pleased with everything because I'm selling you it, but this in particular, I've got a real soft spot for second release. I was quite excited to get it. Yeah.
Really good stuff.
It's really a beautiful whiskey.
Thanks. Sounds like dram one, pretty good. Dram one is always a scary dram because it's faster for you to leave. Like you could just duck in and out the Zoom. But I don't see anybody leaving, so I think we're okay here. I think we're okay. All right. I always recommend when I'm doing tastings that you leave a little bit in your glass because obviously this is our first dram. So for most of you, most of us, it's the first drink of the day. And once your brain kind of clicks into drinking whiskey, when we come back to this, it will taste completely different. So I've left a little spot in the bottom of the glass. And I think we should maybe move on. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, right. So I'm going to continue messing with Gal's system. Sorry, Gal. I think the logical for me progression is that we go for number 5. So we're kind of going across the front of the tasting mat. So sort of an order, sort of an order, but not an order. I really. Sorry?
No, we're bringing more glasses here because everything got all shifted. So my partner here is getting all of the new glasses out. But yeah, so the next one is the Imperial, you say?
Yeah, we're gonna go for the Imperial, and I think my reason for doing that will be that our ones at the back are either stronger or they have a slightly more heavy going profile. So I'm gonna go with this. This is really interesting. So I haven't had a whole load of Imperials in my whiskey drinking career. I've been working in booze for about 11, 12 years. And one of the jobs that I had when I was a student is I worked in a specialist liquor deli shop, both here in Glasgow and also in Aberdeen, where I went to university. And we had lots of Imperials on the shelves and they just sat and gathered dust. Nobody wanted them. And now I wish I'd bought them all. That would have been, I could have had an amazing booze collection. When I think about the whiskies I was selling 10 years ago, now they're the kind of things that people put on shelves and you admire, nobody drinks, and it's a real shame. And Imperial definitely falls under that for me. So let's try this Imperial. Let me make a bit of space so I don't throw my whiskey all over the table under here. Maybe I should do what Ronnie said. I get someone in to get me glasses. Okay, so Imperial. Here we go. The bottle, we have changed the color of our cask. And that means that we have changed the region of where the whiskey has come from. This is a kind of yellowy, mustardy color, so it is from Speyside. And you are definitely forgiven if you haven't come across Imperial before. It doesn't exist anymore, so there's no distillery for you to go and look at. If you come to Scotland, when we can do those things again, Aberfeldy have a fantastic visitor experience. It's great fun and really in-depth and a lovely immersive experience. But our second jam tonight, there is nothing for you to see there. So you can go and look. There is now another distillery there, but it's not Imperial. Imperial is a bit of a sad story. For its existence, it was really only producing whiskey for 60% of the time, which, it was closed for 60% of the time, which I think is not a good statistic for a successful business, I think. I'd love to not be working 60% of the time, but it's not how it goes. So the distillery was built at the end of the 1800s when there was a real, like we have currently, a resurgence of whiskey making. There was a bit of a boom. And there was a lot of distilleries being built and opened, but there was also quite a lot of distilleries being closed. And that really happened to Imperial in the first kind of 6 years of its existence. It had shut twice, and then it was shut for 20 years, and then it was shut for 30 years. And I cannot imagine now having a distillery lying around for that length of time to then come back to and be like, oh yeah, we were here before, we should get on with that. There are a number of reasons that it's attributed to maybe not being very successful. One is that they said they couldn't handle the way that the liquid and the waste production was moved around the distillery. And the other was that it had massive pot stills, which were not very efficient if you weren't running them at full charge. So there's kind of various inconsistencies with the way it was made, but it's a real shame. It was opened in the year of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And apparently inside the distillery, they had like big crowns over stuff. That's where the Imperial name comes from, which is pretty funny because if you know anything about Scottish politics, the Scots generally are not massive fans of royalty. And the idea of building a distillery with lots of crowns as a kind of temple of appreciation of Queen Victoria strikes me as I think it wouldn't have sat very well up in Speyside where this distillery was located. But what about the liquid? So we've got lots of history here of things opening and shutting and lots of ownership changes in hands. And then it was finally got rid of in 2013. It was pulled down completely. And Pernod Ricard, who are the kind of ultimate owners of Imperial, built a new distillery called Dalmarnock on top of it, which if you Google, it's quite an impressive looking building, but it's not open for you to go and view. So you just have to make do with pictures from the Malt yearbook and from Google, or sneaky people that go in with cameras. But what about this whiskey? So everything that I said about our first whiskey, about it being floral and soft and fruity and all those kind of lovely honey notes, this is kind of like almost on the other end of the scale. I think this is very herbaceous, very savory, and it's a little bit mentally. There's something in here that just touches in the back of your palate, I think. They're not too dissimilar in age. We started with 28, now we're going to 24. I'm going to have a little slurp. This is really nice. One of my bosses, Joshua, he loves Imperial. He claims he doesn't collect whiskey, but he collects Imperials because, you know, if you're going to collect whiskey, you should make your life extra hard and only collect things that don't exist anymore. Which, you know, each to their own. I really like this. It's really a great jam. This is much more punchy, much more kind of up in your face, I think. Does anyone else get these kind of like savory, herbaceous-y, yeah, like a kind of peppering on the palate?
Yeah, but the pepper is exactly how it should be. Like, it's not overpowering. It's just, it's floating your tongue for a few seconds and then disappears.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think this is another great example of a malt with an interesting mouthfeel, and the texture, the way it disappears. Exactly what you said, Dor. Like, it's there and then it's gone. It's not aggressively. It's not like a guest at the end of a party who won't leave. Like, you know, it's quite a polite dram, I think. Does the job. Job done. You know, like, it doesn't. It's not hanging around in my mouth for hours afterwards, and making you kind of reach for water. We haven't got to the topic of water. With our whiskies, we don't mind what you do in them. You can put water or ice cubes or Coca-Cola or whatever the Israeli equivalent of Iron Brew is. I feel like you're probably only destroying your own whiskey, but that's, you know, you paid for it, you can do with it as you like. I'm not a fan of being in a tasting where people are very militant about 2 drops of water off the back of a spoon at a 45-degree angle, or, you know, like all these people who will tell you, you can only drink whiskey how you see fit. So if that happens to be with Coke and a sprig of mint out the top, go figure. You could probably buy cheaper whiskey than Imperial to do that too, though. My first 2 drams on here, I'm not adding water, but there will be ones as we go along that I like to put a little drop of water into it. There you go. I can see already a website in which you can go and purchase some delicious whiskies. Yeah, I think this is lovely. It's interesting. It always fascinates me on a much kind of geekier level that whiskey is made from our same ingredients. I have kind of assumed that as we're on a late night tasting of whiskey, that you guys know at least roughly how whiskey is made. But those 3 ingredients have created everything we're going to drink tonight. And I think that's really interesting because they're completely different. All of them are so diverse. And that's down to the science of how the stills are run, about the mashing and the temperatures. But essentially, you've got the same very basic process for everything. It's all these little tiny tweaks along the way. And when you go to distilleries here in Scotland, we're quite superstitious about, you know, when they replace stills, they will come and measure them precisely so that the dents or the knocks are going to be in the same place in the new still. And you know, they're very protective of, like, you know, their secret way of producing whiskey, despite the fact that we're just doing the same thing. Doing the same thing all around the world. Here in Scotland, we're not doing anything that's different to what you guys are doing. It's just that our weather's a bit rubbish, and so things age slower than they do in Israel, or hot places like Kentucky, or, you know, that's a whole other argument. And then about how you store casks. Are they upright? Are they on racks? Are they in dunnage warehouses? But our opening process, it's all completely the same. And here we are, 2 drams, something light and sweet and floral. And then the second one that I think is a bit minty and a bit savory. That's great. I think this would be a great dram for kind of food pairings. Whereas I think the first dram, I'd maybe just want to put chocolates with it or something sweet. And like the end of a night kind of sweet. So maybe it's a bit weird we're doing it backwards. How strong is this one? Our Imperial is 54.6. On the side, I don't know, I'm showing this probably isn't going to show up. So we have on the side of all of our labels, as well as our flavometer, we also have like a kind of brief tasting note, which is something we collectively discuss as a team about what we want to have put on the side of the bottles. And sometimes it's really funny. Joshua and Jason will come up with tasting notes that are very specific to like American candies or American, mostly cuisine-based references. And then we have to kind of like have a little discussion about what that would look like here in the UK. What does that look like anywhere else? Because obviously my releases are the ones that are going all around the world. So maybe making very specific American candy references not going to translate very well to wherever you're sat drinking this, whether it's Tel Aviv or Tokyo or, you know, that one specific type of candy that Joshua used to have as a kid. It's maybe not really where we're going for. But on the whole, I would say that we kind of agree. It's really interesting to sit and discuss cask samples. It's something I get asked about quite a lot. Do I spend all of my day drinking? Sometimes it feels like I do. So it's all very scientific. We have meetings across, obviously, like Zoom is not new to us because they're in the US and I'm here in Scotland, but we're discussing tasting notes and stuff. So we do it at lunchtime for me, but it's quite often 9 a.m. for them. And if we are drinking, we had definitely one that I remember specifically, we had a great batch of rum that we were trying cask samples for. And I had a little afternoon siesta and they had to get up and make lunch for their kids. And we were drinking like 72% rums. I was pleased to have just a little recline on this couch and just reflect on the cask samples we've had. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to pick cask samples and pick things that we think people will like to share. And we hope that what we've picked you agree mostly with. You don't have to agree with everything. Like I say, that's okay. And we've got a couple of divisive whiskies that we'll come to in a minute that will split most people. That's, you know, that's okay. So those are my first two. Please tell me if I'm going too quick for drinking. We can go back over the whiskies at the end.
Okay, Jess, I have a question regardless of the whiskey. You spoke about independent bottlers. Do you know of any other American independent bottlers currently operating? Because I don't know of any.
There are bottlers who have got branches in the US. I think there's a company called DS Tayman. SMWS obviously are in the US, but I think we're probably a fairly unique proposition. I don't know of anybody who has a backstory like we do.
Sorry, DS Tayman is also Gal. DS is I forgot his name.
Who?
Don't remember.
One second. I'm trying to remember the name of DS Tayman, the bottler. Lav, הבחור בפולין, the guy that used to work for the Polish company.
צריך למצוא את זה, תן לי 2 דקות, אני אביא לך.
Anyway, he's also Jewish. He's also Jewish, and he does bottlings of casks in Israeli wine, ex-Israeli wine. Yeah.
Is there not a guy who's attached to that called I can't remember his surname. I'm sure there's a Danny
Saltman. Danny Saltman. That's his name. Danny Saltman.
But he's not American. He's British.
Rani, the Polish is still Novisti.
Still Novisti are the Polish guys, but they are not in the US. They are Polish.
English. He's English. He's from London.
I was asking about people, you know, like American companies that are bottling American whiskey as independent bottlers, like you are doing, you know, buying. I don't know. No.
The short answer to that is I don't actually think there is. Bottling independent bottlers of American whiskey is a whole other category. We did do a bourbon, and Single Cask Nation are famously known in the US for our relationship with the Russells of Wild Turkey. And we've bottled Balcones and Whistle Pig recently. But buying single casks of American whiskies is really complicated, even more complicated than buying casks here in Scotland, because they're massive producers and they're just not geared up for people wanting to come and pick 1 or 2 things.
Yeah. Charlie Prince is bottling quite a few bourbons lately also.
Yeah, Charlie's bottling of the Dramas Club, but he's not an independent bottler. I would view that as like club picks of casks. I have Charlie's Westland. I'm a massive geek for Westland, and Charlie very generously sent me one of his bottles of the Westland, and it's a great pick. And as a club, they are definitely going at the moment, especially great guns for picking casks, but I wouldn't regard them as independent bottlers. They're doing it as like their own entertainment rather than as a product to release en masse.
Okay.
Tell
I
me,
think.
Jess, can I ask you a question? Is there any chance of we being able to bring here to Israel some of the American, some of the bourbons, the whistle pigs, the balcones, you name it, all the American branch of single cask nation that you have?
It's something I get asked a lot, and I am very keen to do it. Primarily, we've had two reasons for not doing it up to this point. One is that the press are very talkative about the tariff on Scotch going into America. Less talked about is that there is a tariff of bourbon coming the other way. So there's a 25% tariff on bourbons coming into Europe. So the price becomes really quite expensive. And the other thing is we haven't been picking casks because of COVID, but also because we haven't really found anything we liked, in all honesty. The effort of picking
Israel is
something
not
like
in
that.
Europe.
Yeah, and now the UK isn't in Europe either. Oh, politics early. Yeah, but there is still a complicated arrangement there. Believe me, if I could put out 2 wild turkeys in every release that I do, I'd be all over that. I would also have an entire release that is just Westland. Like, I am very keen to bring these products. I'm also very keen to work with not just Scotch. So Single Cask Nation, there's no reference in that name to it just being about whiskey, because we're not just about whiskeys. We've bottled rums, we've bottled mezcals, and like you've mentioned, the bourbons. So there are other products. We're leaving ourselves open to be able to try whiskies. Of course, you will have seen that we are very closely connected to Impex in the US, and we are bringing milk and honey into the US. There will be some Single Cask Nation milk and honeys that I think have just about made it across to the UK. Last time I checked, they're on a container, but they are just about in the UK. So there will be more milk and honey. Stay tuned on that. So like I say, it's not just going to be Scotch, and I definitely am open to negotiation on whiskies from all over. Are you recording me? But I'll tell you anyway. As a little spoiler, there's a Paul John coming that's going to be in my next release. I do know that for sure because I signed a lot of very complicated papers to get that here as well. Yeah, so we're not going to stick just with things from Scotland. There'll be another rum coming. The rum's really good. One thing that I'm preempting you asking about, you may have seen if you follow us on any form of social media, that we did a Passover kosher rum.
Right.
That is not coming to the UK. We're too late now anyway, but the company's origins are obviously, we were originally called the Jewish Whiskey Company, something which people in the UK are fascinated by. And when our company was formed, there was actually 3 founders. And when Josh and Jason decided they wanted to move the business on and they parted with their third partner, they decided to move that name away from Jewish Whiskey Company to J&J Spirits because it's about Joshua and Jason. So, and now we are 3 J's. And so that's kind of where that came from. We have never pursued production of kosher products, but and it's something that they've decided to trip me up with by being like, oh yeah, apart from this kosher rum. But that's a product that we've been working on for 2 and a bit years. It's taken quite a long time to come to fruition. I don't know if they're going to repeat it, and if they did, whether or not I would get a share of it. But yeah, that's something that people have noticed. We haven't snuck it past anyone, so I don't know. I think if there was a demand, maybe I could have a discussion and twist some arms, I guess would be the short version of that answer. But we just predominantly just want to bottle really nice things and share them with nice people. That's why I'm here talking to you. So, okay, that was a bit of chatting. Should we move on? I think this would be a good point. So now we will resume Gal's orders. So we'll go for dram number 1, despite the fact it's actually dram number 3. So I'm going to go for our blended malt, because I feel like this is also a good point to pause here with a slight contradiction, which I'm waiting for you to point out, that if we're called Single Cask Nation, what on earth are we doing with a blended malt? The blended malt is a single cask of malts that we bought. So I'm sticking to the fact that it is still technically a single cask. We have also bottled double casks. So we have a Glenfarclas. We are one of the few independent bottlers who have been allowed to bottle Glenfarclas in their livery with their name on it. And that was a double cask because we couldn't decide. There were 2 casks that were just too good. So we released them as a 9-year-old double cask nation as opposed to a single cask nation. But this blended malt we purchased as a single cask already blended in it. It's no, there's no batch production here that we have put stuff together. So it is as it is. And this is a little bit of a step up. So for those of you who are maybe slightly anxious about high ABV whiskies, hold on to your hats. This is a 65%, 65.4 if I remember correctly. Yes, this is from our first release. So our cask has changed to blue because it's not a single malt that we have in here. So these look quite good lined up on my window, I have to say, when I've got them all. Our blended malts. So I always love this game. This is a great guessing game to play with people. Yes, number 1, Alex. So we're back at the top left-hand side of the tasting mat. The blended malt 9-year-old. We do know that everything in this bottle comes from one parent company. So that parent company that it comes from is Edrington. And then after that, I can't tell you what's on it. But you can use your imagination and Google to find out.
Or we can just throw out guests, and you can turn your head to the left every time we're right, and to the right every time we're wrong.
I genuinely don't know. And I sort of feel like one of the reasons I'm not allowed to know is because I would, in a tasting, just be like, okay.
That's probably what you would do.
But because we bought it as it is, the paperwork just said blended malt. It is Edrington. So if you use your imagination to decide what's in this, you can interpret it as you fit. But we do know that everything comes from that one parent company. So who do Edrington own? Well, obviously the big main name there is Macallan. Do I think there's going to be a lot of Macallan in this? Probably not. Who else do they own? Highland Park. I'll let you decide whether or not you think you can feel that kind of peppery heather influence in here. What there is probably a boatload of in here is Glenrothes. And I have no problems with that at all because I love Glenrothes. Our blended malt has been in a sherry butt for 9 years, so this is quite a big and punchy number. If we pick this up and give it a little swirl, yeah, it's definitely got kind of like big, leathery, rich notes in here. I would encourage you to try this before you all reach for your water, mainly because I think actually this is dangerously drinkable for something that's 65%. I love pouring this at whiskey festivals and making people try it and then telling them how much is in, how strong it is, because inevitably once they know the ABV, there's a little cough that follows it. But actually, if you have a little go at this. Now we've warmed up and got into thinking about whiskey and our palates are getting a bit more comfortable with something stronger. As dram number 3, this is pretty good. We're settling into it. But I hope you also see now why I'm messing with Gal's Noodle a bit. That if we had had this before the Aberfeldy, I think the Aberfeldy would have been quite difficult to work with. But now we've warmed up with our Aberfeldy and the Imperial. Actually, this blended malt, I think, is very approachable. I want to have this as like, here in Scotland, we have something that we call a half and half, where we would have a whiskey and a beer together. Traditionally, it's very cheap whiskey and terrible beer that we drink together. I'm not into that. This is my kind of fancy half and half. I'll have this. I've got a nice craft beer under here. It's a nice little pair, I think. Also, as a true Scotsman tip for you, if you find it a little bit hot, then you've really just bought yourself a bottle and a half, because by the time you've added all those little drips of water into it, it goes further. So it's good value for money. Or your ice cubes or whatever you see the need to pit with it. So most of the time I'm aiming to make sure that our releases, it's really important to us to have provenance on the label so that you can see where that whiskey is coming from. But then sometimes we get the opportunity to do fun little things like this, where there's no name, but I am, encouraging you to let your imagination run wild and decide what distilleries you think that are in this. What do we think? Thumbs up kind of whiskey? Okay with this? Yeah, okay. I'm waiting for Dor to give me his critical analysis of it.
I don't have it.
Dor, go
I
into
have,
which.
I have the samples that we had about 2 months ago. So I'm drinking the Invergordon, which is
Oh, man.
fantastic.
Wow, you're definitely having more fun. That's not to put like any sort of downer on this.
No,
I'm so sorry, man. I only thought about how I said I was going to post this through your door at like 6:30 this evening. I'll bring you some later. We'll swap something else. I really like this because it's got a good kind of it's got a good mileage on it. This one definitely sits kind of here in your chest. It's a warmer. This is a classic Glasgow rainy day dram because it's going to warm you right up from your soul outwards. It's the kind of thing you need when you come in from the rain. And it's a bit wet and miserable, which I'm not sure is really relevant to Israel weather. But just imagine you're here in Scotland and it's really wet, really cold, and we're living with the heating on. And I've had the heating on for 5 days, despite the fact that it's like March and we should be over that by now. You know, that's why we need this kind of whiskey.
Okay, Jess, I have another question.
Sure.
You as an independent bottler, are you only bottling ready-made casks, or are you also putting some in a warehouse, maybe not yours, but some bondage warehouse of casks to be aging and then bottle it after a few years?
Oh, good question. So we have casks in a number of warehouses across Scotland. Traditionally, certainly in the earlier days of the company, we were buying casks, to bottle and put out pretty much immediately. But this only gets you so far. You need to start doing a little bit of future planning. So we have been buying quite a lot of casks recently. We have also recently purchased 20 beautiful casks of various sizes from Bodega in Spain. So we're going to start doing a little bit of kind of re-racking and playing around with different casks. We've also got some other interesting products where we've got different spirits which we're moving out of casks and then putting whiskies into those casks. And it's really kind of offering us a little bit of freedom that we've not done before, partly because it's quite difficult to do all of that from the other side of the Atlantic. So having me here makes a big difference, that I can just go and when we can travel, I can go to the warehouse and say, do this, that, and the other, and pick up samples. So yeah, we are doing much more of that, about looking at long-term maturation. We have also bought new make spirit from some distilleries. So that's kind of like really long-term planning. That's obviously not going to be whiskey for 3 years, but it's also not something we're probably going to put out we're not rushing to put out. So yeah, that's a good question. As the company grows, we're doing much more kind of long distance planning. What's this whiskey that we are working with? We're no longer looking for something that's like, yes, let's bottle it. We're now at the stage where we can try samples and think, oh, this would be good in a couple of years. Let's get this, put it away, and then come back and revisit it. We have a number of relationships with different brokers, and we also work directly with some distilleries. So it gives us access to better pricing on casks. One of the fun things of my job that I never anticipated doing is that I play kind of like Russian roulette with casks as they are moved all around Scotland in these various warehouses, and they get moved. The bulk of them we move down to our warehouse, which is down in Dumfries, and then some of the casks we leave where they are until we know we want to do something, especially if it's something we're leaving for a long time. There's no rush to get that down to us, so they stay in those warehouses too. But that's a good question.
Okay, one more question is, how many casks have you bottled in 2020?
Not as many as I was meant to. So we have our three lines. So obviously mine, which is our rest of the world, US online and US retail. And we are aiming for the US to do somewhere between 3 and 4 releases a year. And we do them in kind of batches of 6. And then in the UK, ultimately, I would like to be doing roughly the same, kind of 2, 3. But COVID has really slowed us down. My figures are appalling. We've averaged 1 release a year, which is not where I would like it to be at all. But one of the little known facts about whiskey in Scotland is, as an independent bottler, quite often the whiskey matures faster than you can move it around the country. Everything, obviously, with COVID has really, all the warehouses are on skeletal staff. Our warehouse are on skeletal staff, and they were really small to start with. And lots of warehouses are shut away and you can't access stock. So that's making it a little bit more challenging. And then there's actually getting out of the country, which is a whole other exciting game that I'm sure Eve can tell you all about. But so the long story short is not as many as we'd like, but we're aiming for something like kind of, I'd be comfortable like what, 66, that's, I don't know, maybe 50 a year, I think, across the company, give or take. Something we are starting to expand this year on, which is a cask prick program. So for clubs doing bottlings for, like we were talking about, Drama's Club have done, kind of doing that in reverse. So working with trusted and local bars in various states, and then for clubs as well. So that'll be on top of our general release bottles, I think. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Good. Okay. I think this is also, I poured this, our blended malt, I poured this a little bit before the tasting, and this settles really nicely once it's had a bit of air in it. It's got a really nice kind of like caramelly, makes me think of a very specific brand of sweets, which is not helpful, called Werther's Originals, which my granny always used to have. It's like a really thick, hard toffee that come in these like very loud, crinkly wrappers. It's a very specific memory of being on car journeys with my granny as these get passed around, but I've got that.
I'm getting
Lovely.
a bit of sulfur here as well.
Yep, there is definitely a touch of that in here. I'm not afraid of sulfur. I think you can have good sulfur and I think you can have bad sulfur.
I'm a fan of sulfur myself, so I'm happy.
Okay, good. But I think actually what's interesting about this is one, that the sulfur content in this whiskey, it passes when you add water into it, but the sulfur I think also doesn't transfer onto your palate. I don't think it tastes that kind of like farty type whiskey. But it's definitely, there's no avoiding that in the nose. Tells you it's come from a big fat sherry cask. It definitely, I think that's also what helps it linger a little bit. It's what keeps it in your tongue as you're drinking it. It's definitely chewy. That's a great note actually to lead me into the dram that is labeled number 2/4. Is our Craigellachie 13-year-old. Let me grab that bottle. So our Craigellachie 13-year-old is 58.1%. So it's still pretty strong, but we've reeled it in a little bit from our blended malt. This is a 13-year-old, and Craigellachie is definitely a dram that is known for being a little bit funky. If you ever drive past the distillery, it definitely smells like boiling cabbage and all that very sort of like vegetal and perhaps slightly unflattering tasting notes that we can sometimes come to with whiskies like that. Sulfur is a funny thing. People have different tolerance levels of it, but not always does the sulfurous content of a whiskey come from the cask. Sometimes it comes from the production. So Craigellachie use the traditional worm tubs. So when the spirit comes off the still, it goes down to a copper coil in a big, massive amount of water out the back of the distillery. And it's thought that that kind of like increased copper content is what gives that sort of like slightly meaty, cabbagey sometimes, and some other less flattering tasting notes. And that is here. I also think, having worked in a shop and a pub and various other money handling jobs of my life, it smells like when you're counting change, that kind of like copper. We get it with our pennies here in the UK. Very like kind of touch of that. But again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in this. Again, so if you're not maybe into that as a nose, if you can bring yourself to push past that and have a little try, again, you'll find that those kind of like harsh coppery tones really don't translate onto the palate of this whiskey at all. It's got a really lovely kind of funkiness to it. We started referring to this as a funky monkey. I'm not going to claim credit for that. I'll say Jason started calling it a funky monkey because it's got that kind of like meaty vegetalness, bit of kind of Dijon mustard vinaigrette things. It's a really cuisine based whiskey. I think this, like, it's got a lot of kind of food in it, but that palate I think is really gentle, and it's slightly disjointed, but I think in quite a playful way that you expect it to be quite a big, harsh whiskey, and it's really not. It's got that lovely kind of rich umami-ness to it. And obviously the guys, when they wrote this tasting note on the side of the bottle, it's not very often I read people tasting notes, but they've put here, if this is your style, then this is your distillery. However, it's okay to hate it. You can't be right all of the time. So I think this is quite fun. It's definitely, I think this is definitely going to be a divisive whiskey for whether or not you guys are into it or not. I just say, just give it a bit of time. If it's not really doing anything for you now, just have a bit of patience with it. It does come around. This is obviously, Craigellachie is a sister distillery to our Aberfeldy. And I think this is a great repetition of the point I was making about everything from the same ingredients. If you go between the nosing of the two, you could be well forgiven for thinking that it's a completely different product altogether. What have we got here in the chat? Too many spices for me. Yeah, it's okay. I think it is quite an intense dram, and it's not one that I necessarily reach for every time I want a whiskey. It can definitely, I have to be in the mood for it. But when I'm in the mood for it, it's great. It's not, I think, as easygoing as some of the other whiskies we've had tonight. But I think it's, yeah, definitely funky. How do you guys feel? Are we into this? Not into this? Some yeses. Okay.
But not the smokiness, like the salty funky. Like I'm waiting for the smokiness after the salt, but it's not coming. Like it's drive me nuts. Like I'm expecting this, but it's not coming.
Yeah, it's I know exactly what you mean. You kind of expect it to be a bit.
Usually they go together, like the salt and after this, like immediately the smokiness of the peat.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the salty, but there is a stop.
And that's the end. Yeah. It's funny. That
makes me want a roast beef sandwich with lots of mustard.
I haven't had dinner. I'm really hungry, and that definitely makes me hungrier. Like a really big fat salt beef sandwich with some really, like the kind of mustard that gets up in your nose. It's like,
yes, exactly.
Or if I had the patience, like some sort of like homemade brisket, I don't have that kind of patience. I have to pay someone to do it for me. But yeah, that's something big and sticky like that. That would go really great with this, I think. Great. So now my stomach's rumbling. Craigellachie is a funny one. It's another one that doesn't, it pops up in waves. They obviously tend to be like parcels of casks that appear, and then you'll see a few independent bottlers will do it and then it disappears. Coleman's mustard, yes. I love a Coleman's mustard. That's definitely, see if you put too much of that on, it makes you cry. That's how you know you've had a good sandwich. It needs to be painful, I think. Just really like clears out the sinuses and Craigellachie was the thing. Not very often seen. In fact, they didn't really release it as a single malt until kind of late 2014. If you were getting it, it was like an independent bottler had done it. And that's because it's used heavily in the blends that Dewas are producing and Bacardi products. They obviously, when you drink a Dewas, it's not necessarily tons of Craigellachie in it, but it's just one of these whiskies that we call a top dresser. And it means like a tiny percent, like a couple of percent in a batch can really turn it round. It can really finish it off. I was in a blenders lab once where they were showing different blends and how proportions of blends are made up. And this kind of final icing on the cake whiskey, these top dressers, quite often there's only 1 or 2% in a blend. And they put one in front of us that was a whiskey that had been made up of, I think, 15 different whiskies. And the difference between A and B was that B had 2% of Lafroig in it. And the difference in it was amazing. It wasn't necessarily recognizable as being like, you know, Lafroig, iodine, salty peatiness. There was just something in it that made it sing just that bit more. But just like a kind of extra sparkle. It was really interesting to see. And I have a feeling that's what Craigellachie is used a lot for, is just, you know, adding final finishing touches to it, because it is such a big meaty dram that's, you know, that kind of like last touch, bring that in over the top. I do like this. It's been a while since I've had one, and I'm quite enjoying it, mainly because I'm thinking about sandwiches now. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our final one, and then I think we should go back through these a little bit, and I'll take more questions if you have them. Our final dram of the evening, which is number 3/5, depending how you're counting it, is our Clynelish, and that is, I can find the bottle. The Clynelish is a 9-year-old. We've gone back to the Highlands, so we've gone back to our maroon cask. Again, this is from bourbon. We tend to like our bourbon matured whiskies. One of the reasons for that is it really gives the distillery an opportunity, that spirit, to kind of sing without being too hidden by sherry casks. I'm not gonna lie, if we could put out 6 single casks that were black as tar sherry monsters, I would secretly be thrilled, but I think that's a little bit lazy. We try to be a little bit more creative with it. And I'm hoping what we've done tonight is demonstrate whiskies that sing beautifully without hiding behind big sherry casks. Like I say, we have just bought sherry casks, so I'm not trying to trip myself up by saying, oh, we're not into finishing or re-racking or any of that, and then turn around and be like, come to my new sherry tasting. But I think the ones that we've picked, we've done so because there's a recognizable distillery character in what we're putting out. So my final pour for you guys this evening is one of my top 5 distilleries. It's Clynelish, and that's from the Highlands up in a village called Brora, and also probably more famous for the distillery Brora, because there's nothing in the village that you would want to visit apart from, I'm told there's a good golf course, but then that's it. Our Clynelish is a 9-year-old, and I really think like Clynelish in general is one of these wonderful whiskies that's great at all ages. It's great when it's young and punchy. I also love, we had a 5th retail release for a 23-year-old Clynelish that had been in sherry, and that's just also equally delightful. It's big, sherried, yummy, but it's got that kind of like umami touch in the back of it. It's a bit like Worcester sauce, if you guys know what that is. Like a kind of relish on the top, but it's just was like in the back, like almost like a kind of Bloody Mary, like just that kind of like slight salty tomato-ness, like really unusual, but just so good. So that's that's not what we're drinking now. This is our 9-year-old from a bourbon barrel, like I said. This is a punchy one. This is bottled at 60.1%. So again, we've gone back to something fairly high octane. But again, I like this because I think it's got a great body on it. That lovely kind of waxiness that you get with a Clynelish that's so obviously a giveaway, usually if you pour whiskies blind. So, but juicy, and we've got more of that pepperiness that we were talking about in a couple of the other drams. There's a definite wax.
Very pronounced, huh?
Mm-hmm. And it's very pronounced because partly because of the strength of it. If you add a couple of drops of water into this, it brings it back, it dials it back a little tiny bit. But I love that kind of like sweetness that's in it. The waxy texture in this, the like classic Clynelish waxiness, that I think it's also got a bit of kind of like pears, like ripe pear juice, you know, a really juicy pear that like drips down your chin, but that kind of like the skin that you get with it as well. It's just really, it's good. It sits in my nose a little bit like the mustard we were talking about earlier, but this, it just sort of takes a while to sort of leave your palate and kind of come all the way through. I think this is brilliant.
Some of the Publicious, you know, the Publicious chewing gum.
Yeah.
If you add water, it really reveals a lot of more of the wood in the nose, and also some I don't know how to say it, maybe a kind of banana even on the nose. You know, like a banana candy. We have this. If you add I added quite a bit of water, and it's really gone quite fruity for me.
And because of the strength it's at, it will take quite a lot of water. If you want to really kind of try it out, it will take a generous splash of water. You don't need to be gentle with adding it. Obviously, do it bit by bit so you find your right level, because you can add more water, but you can't take it out. But yeah, the more water that goes into it, yeah, those kind of like candied banana, foam banana, shrimp things, which I've never understood why they're called foam shrimps, because they obviously don't taste of shrimp. But yeah, that kind of like kids candy shop stuff, very like prevalent in this. I think this is a lot of fun. Again, if I could put a Clynelish in every release I did, I'd be a happy woman. I've been told that those are unreasonable expectations that I should reconsider. But you should see my other requests I put in for like 1950s Mortlachs, 60s Springbanks. I'm just getting overridden on all of them. It's a tough job.
So who is selecting the cast? Is it Jason, Josh, you?
All three of us. So obviously I'm not as involved with picking casks for the US because I'm not selling them, but 90% of the cask samples come to me, and then I re-divvy them up and send them on to the US. And we sit down and go through and taste stuff as a group, because I think it's good to have a group decision. I'm not saying I get the final casting vote, but I definitely get an input in what we pick. Ultimately, we're looking to pick stuff which people want to buy. So I think it's important that we, between us, have said, yes, we like this. To date, we have never bought any cask we haven't tried. So, but that's because we've been working on relatively small levels. We've had the control and the ability to try these casks before we're putting them into bottles. I do know that there are lots of independent bottlers, and the way that the market works is it's not always easy to get hold of cask samples. Sometimes it's really difficult. Some brokers won't supply samples. They just expect you to do what we call buy on spec, so just off the list. So again, like, it's not quite as straightforward as you think, but it's something that we pride ourselves on, is that when you're buying a bottle, it's something that we truly believe, you know, is delicious and you should try it. It's not just, oh, we saw it on a sheet and it looked fun. I guess that's just something that we stick to try and make things, you know, true to what we've come from, the idea that we know what we're putting out. Unless, you know, I see a really cheap 60s Bowmore, in which case we're just going to buy that and put it straight out. I don't care how much it was. It was, how ABV of the Craigellachie was 58.1 was on our Craigellachie, which on your sheet is dram number 2. This is great. This, I think I could drink every day. If I had to have an everyday drinking whiskey. It's got plenty going on, but it's not too intense. It doesn't require too much work. You can sit with it for a while. It definitely, like most whiskies, will open out and become, you'll find much more of that fruitiness develops in this over time. I think it's a bit like an alcoholic fruit salad. My kind of fruit salad.
Okay, so Yves, when is the next batch coming to Israel?
Yeah, I think everybody here is very impressed with what's happening, at least from the messages I'm getting here on my private cell. So,
thanks.
Jess and Yves, please, well done. Please explain. Please tell us, when can we expect some new candies?
I am working on that currently. Like I say, there's a few whiskies that are not from Scotland, so we've had to land them in Scotland first. And there are a few things that I want that are in warehouses that are taking their sweet time to come back to me. So it's work in progress, I promise. I'm aiming to have it out kind of before the summer, I hope. Things are opening up here in Scotland, so we are starting to move a little bit quicker.
It depends if you're talking about Scottish summer or Israeli summer, because I'm going to the beach. I'm going to the beach tomorrow.
Okay, well, I'm going to give it a non-committal. I'm not specifying summer where. It could be summer in Australia. Okay. I'm aiming to get it out for Scottish summer, whatever that looks like. It just means it's raining, but it's slightly warmer. That's how we do it. You and your beaches, I'm so jealous. So jealous. I'll just have to go and sit on my doorstep again, and that all as an alternative. One day, maybe.
Hebrew for Scottish summer.
Scottish summer.
It's called winter.
Maybe for the next one, I'll get it out at a time when we can travel again, and we could do this.
Jess, you'll be there for April or May next year.
Okay. Next year?
Oh no! Voice doom, go. You're the
too far away.
Yeah, I'll say next year, and then when I deliver it early, I'll look even better because I've delivered ahead of schedule. That's a great point, Dol.
If you think you'll be able to leave the UK in the next 6 months, then you're wrong.
No.
Yeah.
Go. Stop it. You're pressing us.
Sharp door. I'm going to put myself in a DHL box and ship myself on a pallet. Then that's technically not getting on a plane, is it? That's just leaving the country in some other. Don't say that. I'm so overstaying inside. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Vaccines aside. I would like to come and do this in person whenever that is. Maybe that'll be like my 5th release. I'll come. According to Dole, we'll probably still be inside though. So, yeah. Soon is my short answer. We have a slight imbalance at the moment because there's a little 4-month window we have for the US where the tariffs are suspended. So at the moment, I'm working really hard to push a good chunk of whiskey into the US while they don't need to pay a 25% tariff, which is hideous.
But will they reinstate the tariff?
So at the moment it is suspended and it's down to negotiation. I really think they're probably too chicken to reinstate it, but we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So we need to move everything as quick as we can, just in case that tariff comes back. At worst, all it means is we've moved loads of stock and it's sat in a warehouse and we can pace those releases a little bit quicker in the US. But it's really tough. Both Joshua especially and Jason, they work for an American distribution company and importers called Impex. And what they do is they help us bring our stock into the US. And Impex have been fantastic. One of the things they have done is during the tariff, they have split the difference with distributors so that the consumers haven't had to pay that tariff on the products they're bringing in. So they very famously partnered with Kilchoman Distillery, and Kilchoman and Impex split the tariff costs so that that price wasn't put on the consumer. And the same with Porterskeg and Single Cask Nation and products, I think, have been the same. So I really hope that in the US, the consumers who eventually benefit from the tariffs going will remember the good guys who during the tough times were helping the consumers access amazing whiskies and not have to pay that extra chunk of money. So I really hope that they don't put it back on in the US because it seems counterproductive to me, but it doesn't quite affect what I do.
Are the tariffs out also from the US to Europe?
I don't think they are, but I haven't got anybody to give me a sensible answer to that because, as you've pointed out, neither Israel nor the UK are in Europe anymore. And whether or not there were kind of substitute ones put on, there was also a whole whack of other tariffs on products coming out of the US that were added later, which included American rums, vodkas, and gins, not just bourbons. Which obviously is problematic if we want to get hold of some of these US rums. We're not bottling gins, but other interesting products too. So I hope all of it goes away because none of it is related to the drinks industry. It's a penalty for something to do about aeroplanes, which, like aeroplanes, whiskey my mind doesn't quite add up, but it's also on other luxury goods like random specific Italian cheeses and cashmere. So it's just that whiskey is something that's really popular, so it makes the news more often, I think.
Did Scotland bottle as much in 2020 as they do kind of in normal years?
I think production will probably be scaled back a bit, but only because some of the staff would have been furloughed. But actually, most modern distilleries don't need a huge amount of staff to run it. So I think production levels, we probably won't see too much of a difference. Bottling, I think there'll be a hiccup because obviously the times when people's bottling lines were down. I've mentioned our warehouse, they're really small. They actually didn't have any downtime at all. They just scaled back their staff. But then the bottling, I think you'll see there'll be a kind of a bottleneck, for want of a better description. I think they'll do their best. The big guys, I think you won't see much interruption. It'll be people sort of my company size who sort of have a little bit of a stutter. But I imagine by the end of the year, most people will have caught back up again. I don't think it'll be too much of a hiccup. Unless you're looking for something specific, then you're almost definitely guaranteed to not find it, I think, is in my experience. But yeah, I think most distilleries have kept working because you can do it fairly well, socially distanced. Most distilleries, like Glen Grant, only needs 5 people to run the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you don't even need to change your shift patterns there. The guy just carries on doing what he was doing. So here in the UK, alcohol counts as an essential service and an essential product. So anybody who works in a booze shop has still been working, whereas anyone who works in a closed shop, that's shut. And the same, the breweries have really been feeling it, obviously, because they're producing all this beer, but there's no pubs to put it into. So I have friends that have breweries have obviously switched to producing like packet goods, whereas they were making kegs and casks to put into bars. Yeah. And then obviously they've switched to putting it into cans and bottles so that people can drink it at home instead. So it's been interesting. I think the world has had to learn, 1, a lot about Zoom, but 2, how to do everything on the internet. It's been a kind of a do or die scenario. everything you want is now available on your phone, which that seems to be fine. A long time ago in a galaxy far away. Yeah, exactly. That's completely how it feels. Will we do a Kilhoman bottling? This is the thing, again, I would love to do. We were the first independent bottler of Kilhoman. We bottled it as a 4-year-old many moons ago and many different galaxies ago. And every year Joshua asks Anthony Wills, can we have a cask to bottle? And every year Anthony Wills says something very rude, which equates to no. And the reason for that is because Kilhoman obviously have those very iconic bottles, but when we bottled our Kilhoman, we put it in our bottles. So they had to recalibrate the whole bottling line. And Anthony has said, not on your life is he doing that again, which I think is a great shame because it was delicious. So yeah, we ask, it's an annual question that gets an annual no. But I would love, Kilhoman is one of my favorite distilleries. I would love to be putting out more of their stuff. Never say never. Feel free to send all your suggestions to Kilhoman Distillery. That Single Cask Nation should be putting out more Kilhoman. But I think Anthony has made it pretty clear that for now, no means no, which is really disappointing. So yeah, maybe. I don't know who I have to have bribe at the distillery to make that a thing. I have been really lucky that when Joshua has been picking casks for Impex, I've been at the distillery and I have picked casks with him, which is always great fun to be let loose. There we go. Gal's got it. That is the first independently bottled Kilhoman. Do you still have liquid in that? Look at that. Oh, very jealous. It's great. I love Kilhoman. Again, I think it's a bit like Cloniche. It's great when it's young, but as it's getting older, it's really exciting.
Yeah, this is also actually a very good one. Very good one.
Yeah, and they're starting to mess around with different casks, which I really quite enjoy too.
Way back when it was the Jewish whiskey company.
That's our OG bottling. That's really, and that bottle, we were going through our archives. That bottle took 4 months to sell. All of it.
It was way back. Yeah.
Insane. Yeah, that's really like olden days. We just bottled the bourbon that I alluded to earlier. That was a batch. We had 1,200 bottles for the US, and it sold in 9 minutes, all 1,200 bottles, which I think is a frightening pace to be selling anything at. So yeah, the idea of 2 months or whatever it was, 4 months for the Kilhoman to 9 minutes is a pretty cool progression. I think that makes us like Ardbeg famous, but our website doesn't crash unlike Ardbeg. So
my youngest Kilhoman was a little tiny bottle of 3 weeks in a cask, not called Scotch yet, of course.
Yeah,
and
of course.
That was back when I visited them. I think they were 1 year old or 1.5 year old, just opened back in 2017.
They did at the start of lockdown. They haven't done as many, but Kilhoman were doing lots of these online tastings, and they were sending out little bottles. And at a time when nobody in the UK could get hand gel or hand sanitizer, Kilhoman had bottled some of their new make and put it down as like Kilhoman hand sanitizer. And I tell you, it's because it's peated, it's wonderful. I'm just like washing my hands in it and then like looking like a complete weirdo. Yeah, it was. It's always. I don't know why any distilleries. Lots of distilleries have turned to making hand sanitizer. As far as I'm aware, none of them are making peated hand sanitizer, and I really think they're missing a trick because I would love that. Lots of the gin producers are making nice ones. The Harris Gin guys have done a hand sanitizer, which is amazing. It's rosemary and has it got lime in it or something? Is like fantastic. So I think if I could have peated hand sanitizer, I'd be all over that. There was a good question there about women in the industry.
Yes, and I wanted to say it's really nice to not to be the only woman in the room.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. There is definitely more women in the industry being given more kind of prominent space. I think it's interesting. I haven't mentioned it. There are several promo things I should bring into my answer here. We used to run a whiskey festival in the US called Whiskey Jubilee, which was its real name. When I was first told that, I was like, you can't call a festival that, but it was real. But one thing that I always loved about the Jubilee, way before I worked for Single Cask Nation and I was employed to say nice things about them, it was a really interesting festival that had, I would say, a disproportionate high number of women attendees that was really refreshing to see, because the way that they organized the festival was they banned the use of agencies at tables. So if you were a brand, you needed to have your actual staff working it. You couldn't have hired in models. And their principle behind that was that it was people could answer the questions that were being put to them. Nobody wants to go to a whiskey festival, and when you're like, so tell me about this whiskey, they're like, or they look at the bottle and they're like, 13? No, that's, and I really think it made it a much more pleasant environment for everybody involved, not just women. And it meant that you could actually have a conversation. And I think people, it was a different mindset. And it really excited me to see that suddenly there were loads of like female brand ambassadors that I was being introduced to that I've never met. I've also done like mega high-end whiskey festivals, which fit all of the really ugly stereotypes that exist in the whiskey world. And I think times are changing. I think it's been for a long time kind of wrongly directed as like an old man's drink.
Rather a boys club. It's always been like I'm always, most of the time, the only woman in the room.
Yeah, and I definitely,
and the looks you get from bartenders when you order a whiskey, my God.
Yeah, quite often if I'm sat at a table with a male and like they've ordered a gin and tonic and a whiskey, I inevitably will be given the gin and tonic, not the whiskey. But things are changing.
I know.
Things are definitely changing. I love that Shai wants to know how to fix his fix his wife. I tell you what, there's quite often a good divorce lawyer. There's quite often an idea that we women don't like smoky whiskey. That is absolutely not
wrong.
True. My real love, I'm a peathead. My love lies with a massive chunk of burning earth. Like that's where I'm at. I think it's just about
you and me both.
Yeah,
I sympathize, really.
It's about finding something that works for you and your palate. And sometimes it's really intimidating to be sat with people who are like, oh, you should put water in this, you should blah blah blah. Like, just let her try. And I also think the good thing about whiskey is it comes with practice. So maybe you found one or two that you don't like. I am pretty sure that there will be one that you like or she likes. It just is going to take a little bit of practice and a little bit of work to find out what that sweet spot is. And then I think once you've got it, it's all there. So yeah, maybe start with something that's not going to freak the new whiskey drinker out. So maybe we wouldn't start with the really big, heavy blended malt. And the reason for that is something that's really strong alcohol on a palate that's not used to drinking strong alcohol, that can be quite, the instant reaction is to like, it's too strong. So, water or a bit of ice, or find something that's got a slightly gentler palate, something like Arabafeldi, which is easier. But yeah, definitely it's just about practice. That's my real answer. And also I think come to Scotland and go to a distillery. It's very difficult to be in a distillery being given a whiskey and to be like, no, that's horrendous. The romance of being in a warehouse and trying something out of a cask definitely changes a lot of people's minds, I think, to being sat on your couch with your office behind you being poured stuff. Context, I think, is really important in whiskey.
Most women I know who like whiskey really enjoy peated whiskey.
Yeah, and it's funny. I used to do. I've run a whiskey tasting group for about 8 years here in Glasgow, and before that, I was running wine and beer tastings. And nearly every beer tasting I did, it was the women who were voting like for the big fat imperial stouts and the big heavy hitting beers, while the guys were like, "Oh, we really like this lager." So yeah, sometimes close your mind to those weird stereotypes. It's not true. But also the most offensive question I get asked on a regular basis is, do you actually drink this? Do you actually like that? Oh, and it's mostly Glasgow taxi drivers are the worst bit. You work in whiskey. Are you a marketing person?
I find the tasting notes of every woman I know that really drinks whiskey to be so much more accurate, and every time I'm like missing the definition, the woman in the room will actually find it.
Really, because I gotta say it's a little intimidating talking to you guys.
I'm probably convinced that you have a head start on us, with the whole distinctive tasting notes, on males. So, I can say that as a guy, you know, I never thought I was, you know, anything, you know, but I don't know. I just never thought. I never thought that women are inferior. On the contrary.
There is
But
something
it's
scientific.
branding. It's
Yeah,
branding. That's how it's been sold. It's been sold for males, you know.
Yeah, I
We're gonna
understand
change that though.
I understand the marketing part about it, but I'm just saying that every time when I have this, you know, when I'm tasting a really good dram and I'm like trying to find the word, it's always the woman in the room who finds the word to describe what I'm tasting. So I guess
there is a definite scientific proof that women have their brains are geared slightly differently in terms of palate and like sensory detection. There's a woman called Joy Spence who is the master blender at Appleton Rum, and she's amazing. She has actually been employed by NASA. They have used her training with her palate to create parts of the robots when they send them off to like space to do with like aroma detection and stuff. And she has taught the scientists how to, in whatever witchcraft they use to then make that into a robot. But it's her palate that has been used because her palate she's one of these super tasters and she's got a really high detection ability for all sorts of notes.
I really think that women have better capability of expression and maybe, you know, translation of the feeling, you know, or and the tasting better than maybe better than male or probably better than males. So the whole old school definition of what is whiskey and considering the woman who's ordering the glass of scotch, you know, as something eccentric is for me already, I would say, years.
That's really lovely. That's really, really lovely to hear, though. I mean, but I think also with everybody, like nobody needs that. I always start my tastings when I have newbies who are just starting whiskey. There are no wrong answers. You know, what most of our ability to taste and what you pick up in a whiskey, a lot of it is very strongly rooted to childhood memories because your olfactory memories are tied in with early formative experiences. And I think sometimes it just takes somebody suggesting it and you can completely put your finger on it. But you know, like if I start these tasting notes by telling you, oh, this tastes like apples or, you know, something, it's pretty easy for you to all put your noses in the glass and be like, oh yeah, that's what it is. Because a lot of it is also suggestive. And I find
Don't
that
be
a bit
racist, Jess.
I don't know what you're talking about though. I think
it's suggestive and like you said, it's very much based on childhood memories and everything. And I remember I had a chat at the Krogevke Inn with the bartender, the owner, I guess. I forgot the guy's name right now.
Tatsuya.
Famous guy, the Japanese guy.
Yeah, it's called Tatsuya, and I can't remember his surname.
Yeah, so we were talking about you know, people coming in and saying, yeah, I feel, yeah, it tastes like seaweed, and it's like, no, it doesn't. He grew up with 12 different kinds of seaweed in his early life diet, and and he knows about seaweed, and that's not seaweed. But if you feel like anything iodine related or anything, and you just go to seaweed, that's because you don't have that kind of palate from your childhood. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and how many people are going to be exposed to multiple types of seaweed? I can tell you in Glasgow, it's about 3 people. It's all completely. It comes with training. So I was very lucky in my first proper booze job that wasn't working in a pub. I worked with a guy who was the head wine buyer, and he had a phenomenal palate, and he totally taught me how to smell and like taste wine. And my nose is much better than my palate is. But he was incredible. And at first he kind of spoon fed me and was like, okay, so this is what we're going to have. And this is why it tastes and smells like that. And then after a while, he kind of took the training wheels away and was like, okay, well, I poured this, so you tell me. And I'd be like, but actually, if you kind of let go, you can do it. Some of it's by deduction. So tonight it's really easy that we can be like, well, there are certain characteristics that we can associate to cask types, to regions of whiskey. You can make a fairly educated guess because of age. And you can also guess that some of that influence is going to be to do with ABV. But all of that comes with drinking shed loads of whiskey. And when I was a student and I decided I was going to get into whiskey, my 2 best friends at university were really our students were really into malt whiskies, and we went to an amazing pub that looked a bit like the back of your picture, actually, that we just worked from one end of the bar to the other. And by the time we'd done one end to the bar to the other and we started coming back the other way, we were like able to pick up notes, and then we really knew what it was that we liked or didn't enjoy as much in a whiskey. And it just came from like persistently drinking it. To be honest, at one point I was starting to lose like the taste buds on my tongue, because we were drinking so much cask strength whiskey without putting water in it. So that's a top tip. If you start losing parts of your tongue, stop drinking whiskey for a bit. But that was just how we started, and I was very lucky that we did it as a little group away from the bar. But then we started challenging the bar staff, and then if we were feeling flush, we'd go to a posher bar in Aberdeen, which had the really cool expensive stuff in it. And we would talk to the guys in there who were much more knowledgeable and were then kind of directing us to expensive stuff. For me, one of the reasons I've completely fallen in love with this is it's a never-ending learning thing. Like, it is not possible to know everything about whiskey. And even when I think I don't know anything, I meet people who are just starting out, and then I think, oh, maybe I do actually know what I'm talking about. And then I go and meet some really nerdy people who make me think I know nothing.
You have minutes where you feel you don't know anything about whiskey, really?
100%. And I tell you, every time, even
okay, I feel so much better right now.
Every time I go into a tasting, that 30 seconds before I sit down, I think, I haven't a clue about anything. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh my God.
I do really. It's like that. And it's not that I get nervous about public speaking, but there's like a kind of 30-second interval where my brain just goes, no. And then as soon as we start talking, everything's okay. Like, you should never, I promise you, don't be afraid of talking about it. Because if you're sat there thinking, I don't know, there's also going to be 3 other people in this group who are thinking,
I usually sit here thinking, well, I don't know enough, and everybody else in the room seems to know better.
Nah, these guys are nice. Like, nobody here has booed my ridiculous tasting suggestions. And maybe I've changed some people's opinions on what things taste. Like, that's how you get to know better, is practice. And I think everyone seems pretty friendly.
If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room.
I just think you're mistaking. We're a bunch of assholes, but we're not chauvinists.
Nah, it was, and I also think whiskey's a nice, easy social lubricant. We like to go to Door's house when we can do visiting things, and we like to argue about whiskey, but it's okay because we all drink Bunnahabhain. He's gone. I can say what I like about him. He's not listening. Yeah, and we like to disagree about literally everything, but we always come back to Bunnahabhain, and it's okay. So just because you like something doesn't mean it's wrong if someone else doesn't like it. It's just a different set of opinions. Some people don't like wearing red, or will only drink specific beers, or whatever, each to their own. And that's what I love about this kind of slightly weird, curious liquid, is that in this room we're going to have a general consensus, but we're not all going to agree on everything, unless I finally get to bottle those 1950s Mortlocks, and then all the feedback I'm giving is about how amazing it is. Yeah, so don't be afraid, and I promise everybody has to start somewhere, even somebody who knows what you think is like more than everything possible. Unless it's right. So there are some notable exceptions if we want to get like this. Tully Barden, yes, and also I'm going to say really correctly, Jura. No, not that either. And if you ever see a single cask nation, I'm still being recorded. Whoops. If you ever see a single cask nation Jura, it's amazing, and you should hassle Eve for a case each, because I've actually gone to the point where I've put my neck on a line and put my name next to a Jura, because I have yet to be convinced. I'm willing to continually be convinced. So that's okay. You can come and prove me wrong. But so far, no one has. It's not possible. And Tully Barden's the same. You watch. Next release will be all Tully Barden and Jura.
You're hanging out too much with Dor. I'm telling you, because that's exactly Dor's impressions about these distilleries, and he is correct as far as
that's
I'm
why
concerned.
We're friends.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say friends. He might come back and say not friends.
Where is he?
He does. He has some choice words. I quite like. I like a lively debate about whiskey. That's what I think is quite fun.
Well, Dor. I know Dor for 5-6 years, and Dor is very opinionated, and that's probably that's challenging. Let's put it this way. But he's very opinionated. This is probably why I love him so.
We had a tasting where we gave him a Finnish rye whiskey, and I was genuinely worried Dor was never going to speak to us again. I love it. I think it's a really great whiskey. Dor, not so much. He's not a fan. He's not into it. You should check out Kura Distillery. their packaging, their marketing, the whole thing is beautiful. And I really like the liquid that's coming out from it. And I think it's another good example that rye whiskey, maybe people automatically would think comes from America, but there are traditions all over the place. Like rye is very heavily involved in Finnish culture and all sorts of things. So it would make absolute sense for it to be drunk like that as well.
Yeah. Also some
We're just
good
singing
rye
the praise.
from the Netherlands, from Millstone.
Yeah.
And Zoudam also is the same.
I occasionally get to do really kind of like show off whiskey things where I got to be part of the World Whiskey Awards. And I got to try whiskeys from places like Myanmar, which I didn't even know had whiskey. And we got to try whiskeys from, there was some really nice Austrian ryes that came into that were just really unusual. And sometimes I think you have to free your mind from like what you know the concept of single malt whiskey to be able to enjoy other offerings of what it is.
I have to say that I'm very annoying when it comes to it. And Jess is actually trying very, very hard to change my mind. And it took her about 1.5 years, but she has managed to do it. So
you disappeared, but I was saying how much how much you really enjoyed drinking Kira's rye. And I thought you were never going to speak to us again.
That did not happen.
Yeah, I also think it's something we talk about frequently, the context of picking whiskies. It's really easy to get caught up, exactly like I just said earlier about the romance of picking whiskey in a warehouse, which is exactly why you shouldn't pick whiskey for bottling from a warehouse. Yes, for trying and sharing experiences, absolutely. I had a little Facebook pop-up reminder today that 2 years ago I was in Campbelltown drinking whiskey in Cadenhead's warehouses, and I'm not going to lie, I had a little bit of a moment about it. But when you're picking casks, it's really difficult because nobody really has the luxury of drinking their whiskey in a warehouse. Most people are going to be like we are, sat in their home on the couch, maybe like, you know, sat at a table. Like it's a completely different context for drinking whiskey, and that's something that we're always very mindful of when we're picking these casks. You know, that it needs to be something delicious that you want to drink when you're sat in your back garden or sat with your pals or whatever. It's not necessarily in a very cold warehouse where you're huddled over a glass trying to desperately warm this liquid up while you drink it before Mark Watt moves on to the next 29 casks he's opened ahead of you being in there. So yeah, so but again, I think that's part of the rich tapestry of whiskey, and that's pretty cool. And
somebody told us that when they taste whiskey, they water it down to 20%, so they get a better feel for it.
I don't do that, but I know a lot of the master blenders do it. Richard Patterson I have asked about, and Stephanie McLeod at Dewars, they say the same. Partly it's to do with like palate fatigue. I mean, like we've had 5 drams and that's quite nice, but if you have 100 cask samples you need to work through, you can't be drinking everything at cask strength because your tongue's going to fall out of your mouth. David Stewart at Balvenie says the same. They reduce everything to 20% before they start working on it. And part of me is slightly horrified by that, because how can, like, part of the joy of cask strength whiskey is that texture, what it does on your palate. But they're doing it for analysis, not to sit and say, oh, we drank 100 samples today. Like, but even 20% is pretty strong. You know, like when I've said in my old job, when I did wine, we would go to these wine fairs and we would work through maybe 150 samples in a day. Spitting it out, I'm not that hardcore. I can't drink that much wine. But the same, like by the end of it, I was just like, I want a pint of beer and something that I can actually swallow and not spit this stuff back out, because it's hard work, especially when you're trying to think analytically about what it is that's in your mouth. That's not just a contest to see how many samples you can get through. So yeah, 20% seems to be blenders industry standard. And when we are trying our casks, we're trying them at cask strength. Whether or not that's the best way of doing it is another story, but it also, I think, I don't have a lab in my house. I have a kitchen, and I'd have to really mess around with scales and like hydrometers to make sure that everything I have got is brought down equally to 20%. If I'm looking at a sample bottle and it says 65.2 or whatever, then I sort of know what I'm getting myself into without having to work too hard on it. If that helps. Does anyone else have any other single cask or not related questions? Ask me anything. I don't necessarily have answers to everything.
I think all the questions for today.
Gal, I have a question. Jess, I know you told before, but I want you to give a little more thing from yourself about women in the whiskey world, and especially the way when you want to think and say about what you think about, what you love about, and ideas about another people, everything. Give me something that you can tell, because that's, for me, when I see a woman in the whiskey business, always I say, shut up, let her talk, because most likely she will give you more answers than every man in the world. And it's true. Every time I spoke with a woman in whiskey, it was true. So what you can tell me about it?
I had a conversation, I was in a tasting last night, I had a conversation a bit like this. I think if you ask my parents, and probably if you ask Dor, like, I don't necessarily have a problem with it because I'm a bit of a gobshite. Like, I'm not afraid to stand in a tasting in a room full of 100 men and shout and say, shut up. I think some of it is that sometimes we are conditioned to think that men fit into this perception and that women fit into this other like side of, like women are very softly spoken and quiet. I'm really not. I really don't do very well at the whole feminine charm thing. Like, that's not really my shtick. But I think sometimes if you are in a big room full of people
There are a lot of us like that out there.
I think alcohol is really interesting, the effect it has on people. At the start of a tasting, everybody will be really quiet and quite sort of like respectful and listen. And once people have had kind of 2 or 3 drinks in them, that social inhibition to be a nice, quiet person goes away a bit and people start chatting and it's exciting. You want to talk about what you've had and that kind of hubbub. I think a lot of it is to do with training. And I think as a woman, sometimes it can be seen to be a bit intimidating to get up in the face of all these other people, not all of whom may be men, like people, and say, shut up, I've got something to say. Yeah. It's not a problem I've ever really struggled with because I am a gobshite, like I say, but it can be really difficult. And so I think when you are looking at an industry like spirits or whiskey, but it translates to lots of things, the idea is that you have to work harder. And I definitely have to work harder as a woman in an industry because I have to prove that I'm not like this little wallflower. Like, that first question of, oh, are you actually drinking this? Like, yeah, obviously, why else would I be here? I've been to distilleries where I've been asked, are you the marketing girl? Like, no, like, I actually do know this. I can pick casks. Like,
so many times.
But part of my brain thinks it's okay. These dinosaurs will go away eventually. I don't think my generation, I hope my generation are not going to be like that when I get there. And I see younger ambassadors than me that are coming up, and I think things are changing. We are getting there, and it's really interesting because I think in countries where whiskey is not maybe the obvious and natural drink, I think they tend to be a lot more respectful to women because it's a thing that everybody is learning all together. But here in Scotland, we grew up with whiskey. And so it's always been this man's drink, and that shift away from it being that man's drink, or if you're a woman and you want whiskey, we'll make it in a cocktail, it's going to take longer.
It's true here too.
No, I've been
without the whiskey culture and anything, it's true here too. I mean, you order a whiskey in a bar and the bartender goes like, "You're gonna drink that?"
My way of dealing with that is to just embrace it. Be like, yeah, do you want to talk about it? I'll teach you something.
I'm gonna drink that.
I can tell you, I've been working in the whiskey museum for almost 3 years. I was you can say like the bar manager and the official manager, sometimes with the professional managering. And I can tell you, the most interesting bartenders I had 2 bartenders that there was girls. They always wanted to know more. And I can tell you, the most time when I had customers and around 8 to 10 years around the bar, all the time I was asking for notes, tasting notes. Women was the best advisors for me in that way. And for me, Jess, another question if I have, can you give me the best whiskey you had this year? What was the best whiskey you tried from all what you have? Because it will be really interesting to know.
There are 3 ways to answer this question. This year has been difficult. I haven't had as many whiskies that I would have done. I've done a lot of kind of blind tasting stuff, which is really irritating because I don't find the answers of what they are. There's been some real crackers in those. The show-off answer of what's the coolest whiskey I've ever drunk is probably the Mortlach 75-year-old. One, because Mortlach is such like a distillery for me. I love it. I was in Vegas. I was in the room with the Urquhart brothers, looking down the strip in the Encore Hotel, drinking this phenomenal whiskey, which was just like everything amazing. It's not the best whiskey I've ever drunk, but it is definitely one of the most memorable. It's the most memorable because that show that I was at, the room was like a kind of speed dating room thing where they brought groups in, you did your little shtick, poured some whiskey, and then they left and went to another room. And we shared a room with Gordon MacPhail. So they had the Mortlach 75-year-old, and you're drinking it with Richard Urquhart, whose great-grandfather produced this whiskey and put it down, which is just super cool. And we were pouring something equally cool. We were pouring Springbank Local Barley 1966 and a single cask Carazao from 1981. So like we were playing with the big boys. But the reason I think so much about this Mortlach is because they gave me a dram of it and he was doing his presentation. So I'm just at the back of the room, like nosing it, being like, oh my God, this is so cool. And this girl next to me, who was one of the models showing people in and out of rooms, she looked at me and she was like, she was just watching me like, what a fucking weirdo. And she was like, she looked at me and she went, girl, you so fucked up. And I was like, hello, sorry, what? And she was like, look at the way you're sniffing that. And I was like, oh, you don't understand. Like, this is so special, so special. This is the oldest whiskey ever bottled as a single malt, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, so would you put Coke in that? And I was just like, you know, like my whole Zen thing about you can do what you like with your whiskey. The immediate answer to that is no, you can't, don't. So that's like the coolest, like most braggy, show-offy whiskey I've ever had. I still think some of the coolest stuff I've drunk this year has come out of Westland in Seattle and Washington for like not Scotch whiskey. I have had some.
We tried Westland here. They have some things that really interesting ones. Yeah, they're just going up more and more every time.
They're super cool. I've had some pretty sexy cask samples of Springbanks, which, yeah, they're not in my price range, but I would love to have out. What else? I still think my favorite whiskey from last year was the Lagavulin from the Feshiel that they put out, the 20-year-old, but that's because Lagavulin is my jam. So PT things all the way. But I am
20-year-old Lagavulin. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Wow.
That's the one that if I could drink all day, every day until the end of time.
Oh my. I'm gonna have to find that one.
You should seek it out. So like their standard offering of the 16-year-old.
I know, I love it.
Says about like the kind of like the old timers will tell you it's not as good as it used to be, but I think it's cracking. And it's not.
I know the 16-year-old. I've had several bottles of it. All gone now.
If you can get somebody, and I'm sure there'll be somebody in this group who will impart for some bribery some of the Lagavulin Fesh, which I'm sure someone will have obtained somehow in Israel. If you can get a sneak of that, it's great. So good. I wonder what they'll do this year with the Fesh bottles, because obviously the Feshiel is cancelled. And last year all of the bottles were available online, but they obviously weren't shipping. My side hustle is that I do a lot of international shipping. So I shipped an actual genuine percentage of the release to Sweden because a lot of my Swedish friends were like, so I did a lot of shipping. So I'm sure some of it will have also found its way home to Israel too. I'm sure of it. If it snuck its way into Sweden, then. If not, I know a man not too far away from me who could probably make that happen.
Okay.
I know a woman not too far from me who already made it happen. Maybe she's not aware of it, but she has.
Yeah, there's always ways and means, and that's what I love about the whiskey community is that everybody is genuinely very patient. And if you go to somewhere like Isla during the Feshiel and somebody walks up to you saying, "Do you have a glass?" This is an entirely reasonable question to ask somebody who will then produce a nondescript, probably like I've got a load of little
I'm going to
bottles.
Scotland the second I can.
You should.
I was supposed to go December.
You should wait till we have things open like bars, because bars are really exciting. Like you could probably come to Scotland and look at stuff. I I have friends that are threatening because they've had their vaccines. They're like, oh, well, we can come. And I'm like, but nothing's open and you can't come into my house.
I know,
So
I've
why
had
would
mine
you
too, but I'm still waiting for things to open up over there.
wait till we can do exciting whiskey things and then come look me up and we'll go drink cool whiskeys in Glasgow.
You're on.
That's a real. I'm going to put in here while I'm thinking about this in this chat before we get Powers. I love Powers. Yes. Irish whiskey. When I can go traveling, my first stop is I'm going to Ireland to drink all the Irish whiskies because there's some really cool stuff out there, which Irish whiskey is having a resurgence of its own. And there are lots of very exciting producers making some really cool things. And I definitely want to go. I'm going to put you my email address in this chat so that if anybody has any questions later and they think about it, then you can come and ask me whatever you like and I'll try and answer, whether it's about Scotland or whiskey. And then you can find me on Instagram as @WhiskeyJess. I think I'm contractually obliged to do some social media plugs. So you can follow us on Facebook as Single Cask Nation, but we have a private members group, which I definitely encourage you to come and join us in because there's far too many Americans and I need to even those numbers out somewhere. And where you will get all the sneak preview of the releases as they are released or revealed. We have a great podcast called One Nation Under Whiskey, which my boss is co-host. And if I am occasionally allowed to take over, then I do that. Where we discuss whiskey and there's lots of interviews with industry people of all sorts. And we have a kind of little sub group called Extra Extra Extra, which is about like whiskey news. Facebook is evil, I agree with you. But I'm stuck in my house and it's very difficult to come to your house to hassle you about whiskey. So for now, I have to do some sort of internet-y communication because nobody writes postcards anymore. I love postcards. We should go back to like actually writing mail to each other. Remember in the olden days when you had like a chain mail letter you had to write to people? Social media, for Twitter, we do have @monocaskism, but the guys don't really use it. I do a bit of twittering, just sometimes shouting into the void. That's what Twitter feels like. The Twitter whiskey community actually is pretty good. But I love Instagram because I like putting up pictures because I'm that kind of, I need pictures to change the 4 walls, which I'm currently signing. So that's my kind of social media plugs. And I'm sure if you have any whiskey requirements, then put them onto Eve and then he can eventually come back and have a go at me for not sending enough stuff for things. Instagram, yeah, you can get us @Single Cask Nation. And the podcast has its own Instagram too, which is @One Nation Under Whiskey. There is no E in whiskey, but I also don't need to tell you that because you guys know that there's no E in whiskey. Yeah, and then @WhiskeyJess is me for whiskey and cake related lockdown baking, which I've done quite a lot of. And teasers of the tastings that I do here in the UK as well. We're going to do a Daft Mill tasting and my inbox melted from all the pictures who were like doing doors dance. We've worked really hard to get 5 single cask Daft Mills, which is, I thought getting the Feshiel bottles was like going into Battle Royale. It was nothing like getting all the Daft Mill bottles. So yeah, I like to open bottles and share them with people because I think that's the best way to enjoy whiskey. Yeah, that's where you can find me on the internet and here. But unless you have anything else, I'll just hand you back to Gal.
Thank you very much, Jess, for your time. Thank you for the lovely presentation on whiskeys and chat. On behalf of everyone here.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask one final question? I'm not quite sure how we would do it. I usually do like a vote for what the favorite dram was. So maybe if you guys put it in the chat what your favorite top one of the 5 was, just out of curiosity.
I gotta admit, this was one of the best tastings I've been in the last 6 months, and
thank you.
It's all been fantastic. So my favorite, I won't say what my favorite is. Let's let everybody write their own.
I'm going to be watching this closely. I already knew what.
I second that. This was one of the best tastings I've been in. This was great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Jess, I will tell you. I bought for my father. He has a birthday next month, so I bought him the Craig Lachi 13.
Excellent.
But I was really big expansion for the Imperial because before it I went to my old place to try Imperial that I had. But the Aberfeldy for 42% alcohol, amazing. Amazing. The idea, the try, and every time people want 50%, 53, 54, even more than that. As a whiskey geek, it was brilliant.
It's definitely an interesting one when you see a whiskey that's at that kind of age and it has dropped to that's what it came out of the cask as. We haven't watered it down. I think it's really interesting, and those whiskies are nearly always worth trying because they're always very interesting little drams. Because I'm the same. My predisposition is to drink something fairly chunky between kind of 50, 58-ish, give or take what you want for water. But when this came to me with this ABV on it, I was like, oh, we need to, this is really cool. We should try this because it's naturally fallen to that and that tells its own story. So yeah, I'm completely with you. It's one that when you try it.
I can tell you because as someone that's been in a place with more than 1,000 different bottles, etc., for me always, when it's a single cask and everything, and you're putting it in 40 to 46% alcohol, it doesn't matter the independent bottler. If it's good, for me, it's the brilliant. It's more brilliant than 55 or more than that because it's always really easy to go with nuance and see how it's open the bottle, if it's F year, 3 months, 1 year. But with that amount of alcohol, in my opinion, that's the way of the bottler. And for me, it was brilliant. And it was brilliant to start with. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a snap decision. And I'm sorry, Gal, maybe I should have thought about it earlier. But I
Don't be sorry.
It worked out okay. I think we got away with it.
It was great.
It made sure you, it's a little trick to make sure nobody was sleeping. That's what it was. I was just keeping you all. I was in a tasting last week where somebody genuinely did fall asleep. It was so embarrassing.
Seriously?
Yeah, I wasn't doing the hosting, but the guy he was asleep and we were like, is he dead? Did he have a stroke? And so he didn't die. It's okay. It's got a happy ending. But he emailed the people who were hosting the tasting the next day and said he woke up and couldn't understand why his screen had gone black because obviously he was kicked out of the Zoom room because people were just in the tasting being like, look at that guy. Can we throw things at him? Like, can we shout for help? Like, yeah. He genuinely was just asleep in front of his computer. So he obviously was just so relaxed. He just had his whiskey and let go. Not what I'd want to see in my tastings, but each to their own. Yeah, none of you are asleep, so that's all good. I feel like that's one tick. I'll put that down as a success there, right? I think. So I think
you should put this tasting as a success. It was great.
I will. None of you have told me it was awful, so I think I have very, easy achievable standards. I'm at that level of lockdown where I just do anything. I brush my hair.
I think we're all there at this point, after 3-4 lockdowns. You find your standards have lowered.
Yeah. Today I, brush my hair. Big tick. Well done me. Okay, I'm looking.
Here, all the bars open on Sunday now. We're done.
Seriously? The bars open on Sunday?
Yeah,
everything is open.
That's
oh my God.
The clubs, the bars. I mean, most bars already pretend the restaurants are already open, like Porter and Sons and stuff. But the bars that, for some bizarre reason, can't pretend they're restaurants, they're going to open up on Sunday.
Dora, I hate these people. Why aren't we in Israel? We've got like another month
I know,
to go.
Jess. I know. We have a month and a half, but we can meet outside.
All you need is Bibi. Tell her. Go.
Oh God, you so don't want to be here. Don't listen to these people. You so don't want to be here.
We're all vaccinated. We're all good.
Dora shows me there's no COVID in Israel anyway. It's fine.
Democracy is overrated.
Everything's fine.
It's kind of like saying COVID is the flu.
Being here.
No, COVID here, only Yemenis get COVID here. So it's over.
I'll tell you what, Jess. We can be jealous of them for the next couple of months, and then once everything is open, end of May, we're going down to Campbelltown, and then all of them are going to be jealous of us.
That's true. We'll call you from Campbelltown.
We will come with our new variants, and we
like I said, the moment there's a plane to get on, I'm on it.
I'm pretty sure Campbelltown probably has its own special varieties of all sorts of things, not just COVID. I think, you take your life in your hands when you go there, especially if you're meeting Mark Watt. So many hairy weekends. And then if you go with my friend, he takes you to Devar Island and you get stuck there, which is a whole other story that I'll tell you in person. So Thank you very much. Looking at this, it looks pretty close, but it sounds to me like Aberfeldy may have just nicked it. Aberfeldy, but some honourable mentions there for Clynelish and the Imperial. It's funny. So of our latest release, all the tastings I've done, the Invergordon has won, but the last two that I've done, the Imperial has pipped the post as the best of the release number 2. So that's interesting that we still have some voters for Imperial tonight, but Aberfeldy seems to be the winner. I really like it. I think it's pretty tasty stuff. So thanks very much for playing along. It's been a pleasure to sit and talk to people in another bit of the world. Please let me come and do this in person, because this will be so much more fun.
Thank you, Jess.
We wish.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
soon. Thanks very much, guys.
Have a good night.
Yes,
Everybody for organizing this evening.
By the way, I think we can now do these events